I had a friend that was like mining Bitcoin on her computer back when you just needed a high-end graphics card to do it. And and I was like, that sounds neat. Like maybe I should do that. And I was like, maybe next weekend. I just never got, it was kind of hard and I was busy with all the other stuff I mentioned, right? So I was working, and I was like, yeah, I just didn't get to it. And then of course,
Oh.
like, that was like a $100 million missed opportunity if you just had been someone who, did that. But again, even if I did that, I probably would have then sold them when they tripled,
Mhm.
right? That's the classic. So people think, if only I had bought Bitcoin when it was $1. Well, it's like, yeah, you would have sold it when it was $5, right?
Yeah,
Most likely. And
totally.
so, so I had a couple different points where I would come into contact with Bitcoin. But it's after I kind of, saw it go through enough cycles, eventually I started paying attention to it more when it became large enough that it was kind of on my radar as a macro asset. And so I started kind of treating it in the same way that I treat, let's say, precious metals, where I'm viewing it as a commodity that I'm also, incorporating into a portfolio. I got an idea of how the technology works. I thought the technology was great. And I was like, I have no idea how to value that, right? And especially because we're talking back then, it's a very tiny asset.
Yeah.
And so I was like, that's neat, but I'm not like a cypherpunk, and so I'll
Yeah.
yeah, like good luck, guys. And then so I just kind of ignored it for a while. I had all this. I had health issues. I was like doing financial support. I was working. I was it's just kind of like you lose track of things. And eventually, when Bitcoin goes through those big bull runs, it captures media attention, draws people back in. And so, during the 2017 bull run, naturally, I had readers come out to me and say, "What do you think about Bitcoin? Should I invest in Bitcoin?" And I was like, okay, I clearly have to revisit this now. It's a much bigger asset. And so I did a report on it. It was towards like November of that 2017 bull run. And I said, again, I like the technology, looks really interesting. Here's a couple of different ways to value it. And my overall conclusion, I had kind of two concerns with it. One was obviously that it already had a massive price run up. So I was like, it's a very euphoric market. That concerns me. And then two, I was worried about dilution, right? So that was kind of one of the worst moments for, say, Bitcoin dominance, right? So you had the rise of all these other tokens. You had Bitcoin Cash splitting out of Bitcoin. And I was like, so, even though, say, Bitcoin's scarce, what if the market just distributes into all these tons of tokens? How can I say which one's going to do well over a given period of time? And so I said, at this current time, I'm going to go ahead and pass again. And that ended up being the right decision because you had a blow off top and then you had a crash and then you had a consolidation that lasted a few years. And so it underperformed many other asset classes from that point. But I kept watching the space. I mean, I didn't have like my opinion set in stone, and I saw some of those concerns answered. So obviously the crash and the consolidation took away the price euphoria, and then we started to see that the network effect of Bitcoin in particular strengthened. Right, so Bitcoin Cash and these other hard forks kind of failed to capture any meaningful percentage of the market share, and we started to see stronger and stronger network effects arise around Bitcoin and then Ethereum as well. But basically, only those two kind of achieved a certain level of critical mass that the long tail of other tokens didn't get. I started to see, the groundwork being laid for institutional adoption, right? So we started to see places like Fidelity kind of roll out these custody solutions that larger pools of capital could get into. And so I was kind of watching it for a while, and then in early 2020, when we had the COVID crash, I was closely watching precious metals because I knew that there's going to be a lot of fiscal stimulus coming out of this, and of course during the heart of the crash, you had gold go down, you had silver go down even more. I mean, silver crashed, and so that was like a buying opportunity of a lifetime. But I also saw that Bitcoin and other cryptos were doing the same thing, and they were acting just like precious metals. And so on the upswing in April, I was like, okay, now I'm in Bitcoin. And so I recommended it to my research subscribers when it was like 7,000 in April 2020. And then it was like, it wasn't say go all in on Bitcoin. It's, hey, I'm going to start including Bitcoin in my portfolio. I think it's actually really well positioned here. I started reading more about it. I kind of learned more details of the algorithm, right? So I went into a greater technical depth than I did with my prior analysis. I started, just kind of researching it from a bunch of different angles, going into specifics of how Bitcoin's different than all these other tokens at a more complete level than I had before.
Mhm.
And so I kind of started building my overall investment thesis. And eventually, during that kind of mid 2020 period, I allocated to it pretty heavily because I was looking at, say, that the halving cycle it goes through.
Yeah.
So, and so I kind of just said, okay, the macro environment combined with, the network effects that build up, combined with the, it's long consolidation. And so I basically had a pretty high conviction view that it would do pretty well going into, say, 2021. And so I've been pretty much bullish ever since. During the mania earlier this year, when every cryptocurrency under the sun was going like vertical, I started to say, okay, I'm still structurally bullish here, but the whole space is getting frothy. And so, basically make sure you have risk management in place. That obviously means different things to different people. It means, it's not a good time to be leveraged to it, not a good time to be shocked if you see it go down. So this has been a larger correction than I was maybe expecting, but overall it's been an environment that's done very, very well. A lot of people kind of explore economics through Bitcoin, whereas, from my end, because I was already focused on macro pretty heavily, I already was familiar with all those different schools of economic thought. And obviously, I don't go into some of the individual ones as deep as specialists do in those areas, right? So I can't say quote some of the people in the thinkers in that space the way that you say Safety can, for example. But I was familiar with all the different schools of economics and how I use different pieces of them to kind of interpret data that's happening in the economy. And so it hasn't really changed my outlook too much because I partially came from a precious metals background from a young age, and so I already kind of had that view that I was never, ever since I was a kid, was never super into fiat currency. I was like, we literally have these pieces of paper that have no value, but people think they have value. And so ever since a young age, I was like, well, I want to store most of my assets not in paper. I want to store it in stocks. I want to store it in precious metals. I want to store it in real estate, whatever the case may be. And so this to me was like another asset that I could add to my arsenal to do that with, but one that I thought had one of the better opportunities for long-term growth and capturing market share from other types of assets because it's a global distributed protocol that even people in emerging markets that have a smartphone but they don't have access to stocks in the same way, well, they can still buy some Bitcoin, and we see overall that it's just in many ways a technology that adds a lot of value, right? So it's a permissionless, decentralized ledger, and so I said, okay, I think kind of combining the idea of gold with a tech stock, I think this can do very, very well. And learning from my prior experiences of, say, selling Adobe or Microsoft too early and having to buy back in at a higher price, I said, okay, well, I'm not going to make that mistake with Bitcoin, right? So I'm not going to say buy so much that I'm worried about, say, 50% drawdowns. And I'm just going to buy an amount that I think is appropriate for my risk tolerance, which for me was pretty high because I did a lot of research on it.